Hi everyone, and welcome to our video on our master bath remodel. This was by far the biggest project that we have ever undertaken, and we wanted to share how we got from beginning to end on this. The purpose of this video, as well as our channel in general, is to try to encourage people that might have no background in a given subject, in this case home improvement, to feel like with the right amount of time, effort, commitment, and willingness to learn, that you are able to develop the skills required to complete a project like this and to do it well, perhaps even better than the people that you might pay thousands of dollars to do it for you. So, one thing we did not do well during this project was to document the in-betweens. So I am going to be using a combination of video that we took that's not great quality, as well as some photos and some video that I'm going to take today of how it currently looks to try to explain how we got from beginning to end on this. In our case, we did elect to move plumbing and move electrical because we hated the layout of the room as it was, and no amount of changing the finishes and the fixtures would have made us like that room. So we felt like there was no point in just changing the aesthetics, we really had to change the layout. So the first stage for us was obviously going to be demolition, and what would demolition be without a time lapse set to some good music? So once the demolition was done, we're able to go ahead and make a floor plan. You could have, of course, swapped these things so that you could have had a floor plan before you started demolition because maybe you want to keep a wall or something, keep some electrical where it is, you never know. In our case, it was kind of hard to visualize the spacing of exactly where we wanted everything, and so we ended up finalizing our floor plan after everything was out, and we were able to put some tape down on the floor and kind of plan where things were going to go. In our case, we were significantly limited by existing windows because we did not want to have to get into masonry work and replacing the windows. And there were also gas lines, AC lines, all kinds of pre-existing things running in the wall that we really didn't want to get into. So this unfortunately did limit us a little bit in where we could put things in the bathroom. Ultimately, we would have really preferred to have the soaking tub under the big bay window, but it just didn't pan out that way because of how the plumbing fixtures were, where the shower door needed to go. One thing we learned later in the process than we should have in retrospect was that you can't have your shower fixtures shooting into where the door of the glass shower is going to be, because then you're going to have problems with leaks. So that really affected how our floor plan went in the end. So that's one thing to consider that we didn't think of at the time. Once we had our floor plan together and everything demolished, including blown insulation sucked out of our attic so we could remove the ceiling drywall, it was time to start putting it all back together. So there's a few different ways that you can get this accomplished, but roughly you need to get in your plumbing and your electrical at this point. One other thing that we needed to do, because again, we moved plumbing fixtures, was to patch existing holes that were in our subfloor. So what we did was cut out patches of the subfloor that contained the holes where prior plumbing lines were draining for things such as the shower, the toilet, the sinks. so that we could patch this with a solid piece of wood. In the case of our toilet, there had been a leak there before, so that was kind of rotting out anyway, so we ripped that whole section of subfloor out. We cut the subfloor, which is made out of plywood, in line with where the engineered trusses are that hold up our house from below. That way, when we put in the new patch of OSB for the subfloor, we could attach it firmly onto those trusses and it would have support from below. We used wood glue and then nails to hold it in place. For the electrical, we did enjoy the benefit of having my brother, who is an electrician, help us with the install here. We started with removing the existing wires and cutting everything back to the feeder cables. And then we decided the locations of our new lights, switches, and outlets. We proceeded to run 12-gauge wire to those locations using the existing feeds that we left in place. We used 12-2 Romex wire for most of the bathroom. The can lights are airtight and safe to use in a humid environment. Later, once the vanity was installed, we did add an LED light strip on a motion-activated switch to have a night light under the vanity. Our next step was to go ahead and install the plumbing. 2 parts of plumbing that you need to consider when you're going to do this part of your project. You have your DWV, or drain waste vent lines, which are classically made of PVC and include vents and drains. Vents are something that I did not know a lot about before starting this project. So there's a ton of good videos on YouTube about the purpose of venting. But essentially, if you're going to be draining water out through a pipe, you need to have air coming down behind it. Otherwise, you're creating a vacuum and the water will not drain. You can see this, for example, if you put your finger on top of a straw and lift it out of a cup full of a liquid, all of the water or whatever you're drinking stays in the straw until you lift up your finger. Air enters behind and pushes the water out the bottom. The same exact premise applies in plumbing of your house. If you put water into a pipe that does not have access to air above, the water will not drain. So vents provide this air into your plumbing system. The vent ultimately has to connect to the outside of the house where it can suck in clean air and conversely can vent off any air that did have sewage gas in it, which you do not want in your house for obvious reasons. All the fixtures in your home should be equipped with what's called a P-trap. A P-trap is what you see if you open up the cupboard and look under where your sink is and you see some white plumbing pipe, some white PVC that makes a funny bend before flowing back down behind the wall. The purpose of this P-trap is to actually contain a small layer of water in it at all times. And what this does is to basically block any sewer gas that might be coming up from farther down your system from entering your home through the sink. Once you're past the trapping of the fixtures, you need to tie in all of the individual drain lines for those fixtures into the main drainage line, taking all of the wastewater out of your system, out of your home, and into the city's supply. In our case, we were able to kind of just tap into the pre-existing plumbing line because this space did used to be a bathroom after all. The main plumbing lines were already there, so we were able to just work into those. What we did was to dry fit everything really precisely. We put lines and numbers so that all of the parts lined up with one another. We put them in place, made sure everything fit, and then we took it all apart and glued it back together. Once all of the DWV plumbing was complete, what we did was to install a valve that was inflatable that would block the outflow from the bathroom. This made it so that we could fill the entire system with water up to the ceiling to the point where it was flowing out of the roof through the roof vent, and make sure there were no leaks by holding the water in there for several minutes. Nothing leaked, we drained the water, and we felt really confident going forward that we weren't going to have leaks from our PVC pipes. Next step was to get our supply plumbing in, which would serve to give water to all of the fixtures in the bathroom. What we chose to use was Uponor PEX, or cross-linked polyethylene. It's a plastic tubing that is used in place of copper. We absolutely loved this system for many reasons. First of all, I'm very afraid of fire, and every time soldering was required, I was just losing my mind. So I was happy to use a type of pipe that did not require any heat on a regular basis. Of course, we did have to solder a fitting that would tie the copper in with the PEX, so basically convert our existing copper into a PEX fitting. But otherwise, soldering was really limited throughout this project, which I was grateful for. So using PEX has multiple benefits, the first of which is its flexibility, so you can have very long runs without needing any fittings in between. And of course, the less fittings you have, the less potential you have for a leak. Another thing that it's good for is that it does expand some. Now, we live in Florida and freezing is not really a concern for us. Occasionally it'll get into the low 30s, but it's not typical and it's never prolonged. So while it's not a big deal for us, you might live in an area that does get deep freezes, and you might consider PEX because it will expand some to accommodate freezing much better than copper. Another thing that's good about this, and this is specific to the Uponor type of PEX, is that they use what's called expansion fittings. So what you do is you slide down a ring on top of the end of the PEX tubing. You then expand the tubing with the ring on it. You insert the fitting into that expanded edge, and then the ring and the tube clamp down on the fitting. What this means is that actually the weakest time in that fitting's life is as soon as you've made the connection, and it continues to get stronger over time, whereas other types of fittings such as clamp fittings, crimp fittings, and things of this nature are going to be strongest at the time that you make that connection and then actually potentially get weaker over time. What we did was run 3/4 lines of hot and cold water to our shower valve. For all of our valves and fixtures, we used Kohler, which I'm not as happy with as I hoped that I would have been. Some things actually came a little bit banged up, a little bit crooked almost. One of the faucets on the sink is just a little off, and it's off in a way that's not adjustable. It's a solid piece of metal, and it's just not quite aligned. Sometimes the shower valve, the diverter, which changes basically between the different shower heads, seems to sort of let water through on a side that you have turned off for a fixture that you're not trying to use. The bath filler was quite leaky, again, not from where we installed it, but just from the machined head, basically, of the filler. So I don't really know the solution to this, because my impression was that, you get what you pay for with these things, and Kohler was not cheap, and I thought that we were making an investment in a higher quality product, but honestly, at the end of the day, didn't really love what we were getting from them. And I'm not sure what the solution to that would be for future projects that we're planning to do on other bathrooms. So most modern valves are and should be anti-scald. So you've probably been in a shower at some time in your life where somebody flushed the toilet and all of a sudden you were getting burned. And the reason for that is the cold water pressure going into the shower drops when somebody else turns on a fixture that uses cold water, such as flushing the toilet, for example. So what you need is a valve that also reduces hot water at the same rate at which cold water flow was reduced, such that the temperature stays the same and nobody gets scalded. So that's one thing that you want to look for in the valve, and in our case, the valve is. Your code might even require this, and it is considered something to be a fall risk for older people because it's kind of shocking when it happens. So it's something you do want to look for in the valve. So we have 3/4 line going into our valve, and then out of that, we go directly to a diverter valve. This is a 6-way diverter valve, which works for 3 fixtures. So basically you can have any of the 3 fixtures on alone, or you can have 2 fixtures in combination. So the fixtures that we have hooked up to this are going to be our rain shower head, which is the main shower head that we use on a day-to-day basis. We also have a handheld shower head, and we have body sprays. We ran 1/2-inch plumbing to all of these. When you're installing these fixtures, when you're installing these valves, you need to reference the instruction manual, which will tell you how deep into the wall these things actually need to be set. This is a big deal because when you put your tile on, if your valve is either too far in deep or even worse, frankly, too far out, you're not going to be able to properly lay the tile on top of it and then cover it up with the fixture that goes on top so that you can't see the parts behind it, the trim as it's called. So this is something you really need to pay attention to. So now that all your supply plumbing, your drain waste vent plumbing, and your electrical is done, it's time to get an inspection for these rough-ins if you're going that route. We did, we passed, and so we were cleared to go ahead and put back the insulation. At this point, it probably would have been good if we upgraded our R value for a little more insulation in this room, but honestly, it just wasn't something that we wanted to spend additional money on, so we just put back in the old insulation that we had before. Now, For our drywall, just to be honest with everyone, full disclosure, we did end up hiring somebody to help us out with the drywall. We got quotes from several companies, which were many thousands of dollars to do this job, and instead just had a guy who was employed by one of those companies help us out with this for a few $100. We bought the materials, we brought them in, we fed him and his helper, and we were happy for this to be done for us in a weekend or two because it was just not something that we wanted to spend our time on. We felt that somebody with the experience was going to get this job done better for us and faster, and we feel really good about that choice. What we were able to do is replace the blown-in insulation in the attic that we had taken out. So we did that. So now our insulation is back in and the room is climate controlled again, which makes it a little bit more comfortable to work in. And now it was time to start building the shower. So that's a really interesting thing that I had never thought about, is what exactly makes a shower? How does it get constructed? And there's a lot of different options here. You can do a traditional mud pan, which is made of mortar and is leveled by hand, sometimes with the help of some sticks that you can kind of embed, plastic sticks that you can embed under the mortar to get the slope that's needed to drain the water appropriately. You can build the curb out of plywood and all kinds of things, but what we decided to go with was what's called the Schluter-Kerdi system. We were so happy we used this product. They have a whole line of everything that you need to get your shower made well, made in a waterproof way, and we couldn't really recommend it enough. So what we ended up purchasing from them was a kit that included the shower pan, which is pre-sloped, a curb. We also purchased a bench, and we purchased the materials that we would need to waterproof this. So we put everything in place, dry fitted everything, measured out how much we were going to need of the materials, and got everything set up. The way that this system works is that it uses unmodified thin-set mortar put onto your wall, or your substrate as they call it. You could use plain old drywall, but just out of an abundance of caution, we did go with cement board here, but you would be well within the warranty if you just used regular old drywall. You put down the unmodified thin-set mortar, and then you embed their material, which is the orange felt-like material that you see here, into that mortar. It provides a waterproof surface on which you can lay your tile. At the seams between the sheets of Kerdi, you're going to use what's called a Kerdi band, or another little thinner piece of their material to cover that seam so that no water can get through. They also provide corner pieces, edge pieces, pieces to go around drains and fixtures and valves and everything that you could ever want. So you just really have to get a shopping cart together of the parts that you need for your particular shower setup. So you embed all of this in the thin-set mortar, let it dry, and then once you've done that, you fill it with water to the curb to a defined level that you've marked, and that will allow you to make sure that this thing is holding water. And everything's going to drain really nice because it's pre-sloped to all go towards the drain. They have excellent videos on their website and on YouTube about how to install this system, and it went really well for us. They also offer what's called an uncoupling membrane. This goes between your subfloor, in our case OSB plywood, and your mortar for your tile. So the purpose of this is to reduce the chance of your tile cracking due to shifting in the subfloor below. So as you can imagine, tile, mortar, and subfloor, specifically wood subfloor, but also cement subfloor, all have very different properties that affect how they expand and contract in different temperatures and different humidities. If you have your tile bound mechanically to your subfloor, then when these things happen, it creates a shear force. Maybe your tile is expanding this way, your subfloor is going this way, and you get a crack. So what you need to do is uncouple the tile from the subfloor, which allows them to actually move smoothly across one another without one putting any strain on the other. So some people would put down cement board for this, but we used the Kerdi Ditra system, which also is waterproofing, so that if we get any water that somehow goes through the tile, it will not leak down into the subfloor below. So this goes down, in this case, with modified thin-set mortar. So you do need to read your product labels and make sure you're actually putting all of this down with exactly what it should be, otherwise it's not going to perform the way that you're expecting. So now that we have everything waterproofed, we are ready for tile. For our floor, we used an 8 by 48 inch wood look plank style tile. We put this down in a staggered pattern to mimic the look of real hardwood. We really recommend taking this approach because if you actually line up the joints, it looks very unnatural and does not look at all like wood. Also, because the same pattern of tile repeats itself in the box, you want to go ahead and get these laid out ahead of time so that you can make sure you don't have a bunch of pieces that actually have the same pattern all in the same area, and you will also not have the natural wood look that you're going for. We also recommend pre-laying out and cutting and labeling all of this tile because once you're working with the mortar and it's drying, you are going to be moving fast. Time is of the essence. You're trying to use up all this material before it dries, get the tile down, and it can be a sort of stressful time, and I would not want to be cutting tile in the middle of that, especially as somebody not experienced in doing this. So that's our recommendation for you. We would pre-measure, pre-cut, label, dry fit everything, and then your install is going to go much smoother. So to install on top of the Ditra uncoupling membrane, we did use a unmodified thin-set mortar. We put the tile down with this and we used spacers called the Raimondi leveling system. This really reduces the variation in height between the tiles, which can be a big problem for large format wood look plank tiles like we are using. This creates what's called lippage, or when one end of the tile is higher than the edge of the adjacent tile, and it can create a trip hazard as well as just an unpleasant look. So we used this leveling system, which worked excellently. The tiles are so smooth, they look like they're all in the same exact plane, and it came out great. So you put these clips in, tighten them down, and come back the next day and basically go around the room and just kick them out of the floor, clean up the mess, and you're left with nice level tiles that are ready for grout. In our case, we used a fast drying grout called Ultracolor Plus FA, or fine aggregate, from Mapei. This was an extremely fast drying grout. Wow, we must have thrown out probably close to 60 to 70% of this material because we just could not get it in fast enough, and it was a really tough timing sort of a thing for us to work out, where Luis was putting the grout in and then I was coming behind him and trying to wipe off the first layer of haze and kind of buff the grout into the lines. I would probably recommend working with a product that does not dry so fast. The reason that we used this, and we did know it was fast drying going in, was because it didn't have to be sealed. And that was something that we just didn't want to do. So in retrospect, it came out okay. We eventually got the hang of it, but I can't really say that I would recommend it to another first-time tile layer or another beginner. I would probably just take the extra step and seal the grout. Another part that was hard about this was I was responsible for, again, taking a damp sponge, buffing out the grout lines, taking off the haze, and this was something that I had never done before, and I think I used too much water and I actually stripped the color out of the grout in places, which can definitely happen. Fortunately, in the case of our tile, because the tile is a really irregular color, irregular pattern, you can't really tell and it just kind of blends into the whole look of the floor. But if you get up close, you can see that there are patches with lighter grout, darker grout. It's just generally pretty uneven. Oftentimes, grout will darken over time just because it tends to collect dirt, so we're not terribly worried about it. But if you had used an extremely uniform floor tile and then screwed up the grout like I did, you would probably not be happy with it, and you'd have to go back with like a grout colorizer, which would restore the intended color to the grout, and it is available for the grout color that you chose from Mapei, so you could always do that too, but we chose to just leave it. By the time that we were tiling the shower, I think I was much more proficient with the damp sponge and I didn't really streak the color out of that grout. Another benefit was just that that grout was lighter, so even if I did strip the color out, it would not have been nearly as obvious, luckily for me. So then moving on to the shower tile. So we did a small penny round for the floor, and you want to generally have a small style tile for the shower floor, for the reason being that the grout is what actually gives you traction on the shower floor. The tile itself is going to be slippery, so you do need to pick something that has a decent ratio of grout to tile for safety purposes. Even better if you choose a textured tile. In our case, the penny round is not. What we used for the walls of the shower was a subway tile that has a sort of irregular wavy finish look, which we loved because we think it gives it sort of more of a handmade, non-factory produced look, and it reflects the light really beautifully. It was helpful to have my dad, who has a background in engineering, to figure out exactly where the tile layout should start. This is something that you absolutely have to think through, because in our case, we started the tile on the outside of the shower bench. It wrapped into the inside of the shower bench, then into the shower wall, and finally around the inside of the curb. It's also on the outside of the curb, so you need to think at every single one of these junctures, how much tile am I going to have left at the end of that run? You don't want to end up with a 1-inch sliver of tile or even less. It would look really ridiculous and you would have a very hard time getting it in. It would be covered with grout. It would just be a mess. So you need to have a decent sized tile basically at every transition point between all of these corners in the shower. So it required a lot of forethought and laying out ahead of time to make sure you did not end up with a strange measurement in any of these places. We did, regardless, end up with a strange measurement, but it's in the inside corner of the curb. You cannot see it because it's underneath the stone that lays on top of the curb. So overall, it was the best possible outcome. For the stone, we used what's called a white Macabus quartzite. Quartzite is nice because it's something in between a granite and a marble in terms of how hard it is. Now it is a natural stone and for that reason does need to be sealed. We were not thrilled with the way that the stone manufacturer did install the stone into our shower. They used what's called mastic, which is an adhesive that is not appropriate for wet environments and thus completely not appropriate for a shower. They also used essentially no material so that it was not adhered at all to the bench or the curb. We quickly discovered this when we came back the next day and found that neither of these things were actually attached to our shower. We took them off, we put on the appropriate thin set mortar and reinstalled them and have not had any issues with it since. So now that our shower is tiled, our stone is in, we are ready to install the trim of the plumbing fixtures so that everything becomes usable. We installed all of the trim for our valves and our body jets according to the manufacturer's instructions, and we did the same for our faucets as well as for the floor mount tub filler. With all of that done, at this point we're pretty much ready to get our glass installed. This was something that we did have a company do here locally, and we're very happy with the fact that we did. The amount of time and precision that went into getting this glass right is something that we would just not have been capable of. Other finishing touches that we did around the same time included the crown molding, which was wildly difficult. We took for granted that our room was square, and we were so wrong. We must have destroyed, dozens of feet of molding trying to get this right, and the angles were just not lining up because the room was not square. So I would strongly recommend taking the advice of other people on YouTube, getting a set of calipers and figuring out exactly how out of square your room is before you waste hours and several trips to the hardware store, money, paint, everything for redoing the crown molding over and over and over again. That was really challenging. But in the end, nothing that some joint compound and some paintable caulk could not fix. So it's up there, it looks fine, just don't get too close. Another thing that we did was install a hardwired towel warmer, which we love. It keeps our towels nice and dry and fresh in between washings, and it's great to grab a warm towel off of that rack when it's a cold morning and you're showering before work. Another fixture that we really love is our mirrors, which has LED light strip around them for illuminating your face if you're doing makeup or your eyebrows or whatever, shaving, I guess, for a guy, whatever you want to do. And they also have a defogger. We don't end up using the defogger a lot, probably because of a combination of how large our room is, but also because we installed a really strong Panasonic fan. Another feature that we enjoy is from our tub, which we got from Signature Hardware, and we had filled with a foam insulation. This means that the bath stays warmer longer, and it was a little bit more of an expense, but it's nice because it helps us to enjoy the bath, which is expensive in and of itself. So it's a feature that we would recommend, and you'd probably get more out of it in a cold climate, but we're happy that we did it. Some things that we still have planned to do and have not yet completed include getting some artwork up on the walls, specifically the big empty wall between the toilet and the tub, and we're also going to be putting some open shelving and a bench area to get dressed at underneath the towel rack so that you have an area to put your clothes, to dry off and get dressed, and to sort of finish up that space, which is pretty empty right now. Overall, we are really happy with the outcome of the bathroom. I love using it every day. I love starting my day in there, and it's just a beautiful space, and I'm really proud of what we've created. I think we did the best job we possibly could have, given that it was our first time doing something like this, and given that we had a lot to learn along the way. I hope that some of the things that I've pointed out might benefit somebody else as they begin to plan a project like this. Maybe you can avoid some of the pitfalls that we had along the way, and I hope that you feel empowered that you can do something like this. We're both in the medical field. We have no experience in home improvement. I personally hate manual labor, and so this was something that was way out of our comfort zone, but it ended up coming together great because of the combination of our effort, our willingness to learn, and just good old-fashioned elbow grease. So we're looking forward to bringing some more content about learning how to do things that you don't know how to do and then doing them well to our YouTube channel. So we hope you enjoyed it and that you'll come back to see some other projects like this along the way. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and we'll get right back to you. Thank you.